Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Coffee Talk webinar, Sipping on Standards, Policing the Path to Accreditation. My name is Liz, and I'm thrilled to be your host for this engaging and timely discussion. Today, we'll be exploring the evolving landscape of law enforcement and diving into the critical role accreditation plays in ensuring high standards within police departments. Accreditation isn't just about meeting requirements, it's about fostering transparency, accountability, and operational excellence. These elements are essential for building trust and strengthening relationships between police departments and the communities they serve. We are fortunate to have an incredible panel of experts joining us this morning to share their insights. We have Rick Rathbun, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Program. We have Chief Ed Burman of Wayland, Town of Wayland, Massachusetts. We have Patty Grigas, a law enforcement professional and senior project manager with Capital Strategic Solutions. We also have Joe Compercio, former Weymouth police captain and senior project manager with Capital Strategic Solutions. And last but definitely not least, we have Nicole Figueredo, CEO of Capital Strategic Solutions. So over the next hour, our panelists will discuss the challenges and opportunities facing local law enforcement, the importance of community engagement, and how programs like the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Program are driving meaningful change. We invite you to join the conversation by either using the raise hand feature or dropping a question in the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. Rick, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the role accreditation plays in shaping law enforcement standards in Massachusetts?
So yeah, absolutely. The accreditation program, Massachusetts Police Accreditation Program, has been in the Commonwealth going back to 1997. So we're approaching we're in our third decade of service here. The accreditation process is a self-initiated voluntary program for law enforcement agencies. There's no mandate, so an agency has to commit to voluntarily participate in our credentialing program. We assess agencies on compliance in our program with nearly 400 specific standards. Those standards may require the establishment of a written directive of a policy, development of a specific process or protocol for something within a topical area, training on various areas related to their mission, size, and function, as well as some observable standards. In various areas, some of the topical areas we consider a code of conduct, use of force, agency management, patrol operations, special operations, transportation, holding of detainees, property and evidence, just to name a few. As you can see by that list, one of the key things about accreditation and its role is it's an agency-wide, and it's all facets of the agency. It's not just patrol operations. It covers administrative functions too. So it's a pretty inclusive program. And it's a path for agencies to really establish that professional level and best practices in law enforcement.
Thank you, Rick. I'm learning so much, and I know that a lot of police departments in Massachusetts have to be accredited. And what does accreditation mean to police departments for those getting hired, for retaining and recruitment? Do police officers choose to go to departments, or up and coming out of the academy, choose to go to those departments that are accredited versus one that's not accredited?
So in my experience, the newer officers don't necessarily have that upfront knowledge of what accreditation is. There's not necessarily a lot of understanding, but all of the programs, whether it's the Massachusetts Police Accreditation, MPAC, or CALIA, the Commission for Accreditation of Law Enforcement, which is the national program, one of the first things they mandate is training for new officers. So when they walk in the door, they may not know coming in off the street as a recruit or candidate, but the programs are set up so that they're indoctrinated in the process and the understanding of the basics and tenets of accreditation for the time they walk in the door. I think when you're new and you don't know anything else, it's a lot easier to absorb. Okay, I have to have a policy manual. I have to have these processes in place. I think it's departments that come into the program with veteran officers that are a little bit, I'll use the word, it's a little bit harder sell, just because a change in law enforcement is not always embraced. And, this can be a significant change for an agency, as the chief and deputy chief can tell you.
Joe or Patty, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I can jump in and say I think this department is in a hiring process. So many young officers coming in, they're not sure of policies and procedures and standards. And then they'll hear from classmates, well, in my department, we do it this way, in my department, we do it that way. And it might be refreshing for them to come into one department that's standardized. And pretty soon, each department in the area is all doing the same process. So it doesn't become a competition. Well, my place does it better. We should all be doing it the same.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add to accreditation, I can tell you in my former agency that when we began the process of accreditation, it was kind of a new thing for us because things that were done in the past, um, even though we've done them to our abilities, it doesn't mean that we're actually doing it the correct way. And what I found in the accreditation process is that because there are standards that we'd have to meet, these are the best practices in policing. So the adoption of standards helps the agency become better in the long run. So that's why I found it very advantageous to be in the accreditation process.
Liz, can I just jump in on that? I think one of the things, there's a fear for agencies that aren't part of the process, and Ed's been in the game for a while, and Joe and Patty, and so it's a little different from us. But when you first enter the program, there's a fear of there's so much to digest. I mean, it's literally a side of beef, and our approach is one bite at a time, candidly, is the best analogy I can give you. But what we often find is that many departments are following processes and they do things a certain way. The missing element with accreditation is they haven't memorialized it to a written directive or a written process. So they're handling the holding facility the way they're supposed to, or they're handling the way they're supposed to the traffic function within our standards, but they just don't have it in writing in a directive. So the biggest advantation for an agency that's coming in new is they take these processes, these protocols, and that apply to the standards, and they're memorializing it to writing, which honestly, particularly for new officers on that topic, is invaluable because now they have a guide or a tool in writing. So it's not like, hey, buddy, this is the way we do things here in Wayland. We have a written directive that will help guide you through it. So it's interesting to find that many departments, when they really roll up their sleeves, they're like, oh, we do this. We just never memorialized it in a written directive. So that's sort of an interesting concept on the front end I've seen in the nearly 3 decades I've been doing this, that it's the processes are in place. They're just not always memorialized in writing at the beginning the accreditation process in earnest.
And I can add in, I think one thing that's also happened is, for example, a department that's looking to become accredited or having an issue with something, we're now sharing information with other departments, right? So if we're not sure how to do something here, I'm reaching out to other departments saying, hey, can you help me with this one? When different things arise, and then that's helping us write our policies.
Chief, do you think that it would be helpful for like a third party company or consultant to help write the policies for the department? Is that something that is like designated for one officer, or like who writes the policies for those of us who don't know?
Yeah. Obviously that's a place where we struggle a little bit, right? I have a very limited budget and staffing. So I have my accreditation manager he's my administrative sergeant. So, but he has to cover the road 2 days a week. So honestly, if the town were willing to give me the budget, I would like to hire someone that would be their full-time job.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing both, working as an active police officer and then also having to do the kind of administrative work. It's definitely got to be a struggle, especially with the staffing nowadays and recruitment and retainment. So what I'm going to kind of change the subject a little bit, like kind of sticking with accreditation, but just to talk more about you, Chief Burman. How long have you been with Wayland Police?
I have been here just about 3 years now in Wayland.
Okay, wow. Have you been before? Were you in a different department?
Yeah, so I did 20 years in Framingham and I had multiple roles there. And then I was in Ashland for 8 years as the administrative sergeant in Ashland.
So you're very familiar with doing the kind of administrative work, right?
Yes, very,
Yes,
very,
the
yes.
writing. And also with the policies, they're always kind of updating and changing. And I know that body cam policies are new now. And I know I've personally written a few press releases about body cam specifically and getting different funding and grant opportunities. What kind of what do you see as like the biggest challenge facing your department today in general, I guess what we'll say?
So in general is hiring, right? We're not just going to hire somebody to hire them. We're going to hire the person that's going to be the right fit for us. So what I've done, sorry, is I've included officers and a lot of my supervisors as part of the hiring process and the interview process. And I'll use a great example. So we had an opening and we had a total of 4 people that applied. And it was funny, there was one person I liked and the panel, they didn't like him. And so we talked afterwards and I was like, tell me why. I don't get it. And I'm listening to them. And at the end of the day, out of the 4 people, we hired the one that was going to be the right fit for us and for the town.
So, yeah, I know that.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in here just because we've had a lot of communications from other departments as well. And when we're discussing hiring, there's such competition out there between the departments themselves and with the state and the state police. Have you, I'm kind of focusing this on you, Ed. Have you run into issues where you're having trouble recruiting for your positions?
No, we've been very fortunate here. Number one, we actually pay very well. So we pay more than any department around us. And what we just settled last year, we settled an additional 3-year contract where, and I'll just say the percentage, it was 3.25, 2.75, which was pretty significant. Plus, we changed our QUIN. So you do not have to have a degree in law enforcement. Whatever you have your degree in, if you have a degree, we are going to pay you the additional monies. Plus, we are now giving officers here, we reimburse you $2,000 a year towards your next degree. So if you don't have a degree and you just want to go for your associates, we will reimburse you $2,000 a year, and you can continue to do that up until your master's.
That makes you very highly competitive. People, when they hear that, they sort of look at the advantage and also a department that encourages them for an education. Because when you hire somebody, you are hiring at a 20-year investment. It's not someone you're going to hire and keep a year or two and they'll take off. You want to invest in that person, have them grow within your agency. And encouraging education is super important.
Plus, the other thing I will tell you, when I came to Wayland, I had noticed that the additional training budget was very low. The money was very low. So I was able to work with our finance committee and increase that budget line item. So what we tell our officers is, beyond your 40 hours of in-service training, we want you to seek out other trainings, but we want it to meet 3 criteria. It has to be a benefit to you, a benefit to the department, and a benefit to the community. So those are the types of trainings that we're sending officers to, and we now have the budget to handle that.
That's amazing.
I was thinking about what you said, Patty, about how you have to think 20 years down the line for your who you're hiring, and that's it. I don't know if it's always been like that, or if it was just it's the fact now that it's kind of few and far between to get people to get new recruits, new kids out of the academy, applying for positions and things like that.
Yes.
Can you guys talk a little bit about just like recruiting officers, retaining them, and some of the struggles that have been going on?
It's incredibly difficult, the recruiting, because now every agency has contract issues or management issues, or as Ed's department is, education is fantastic. But coming out of maybe college classes or going to criminal justice programs, the candidates coming in aren't looking at 5, 10, 15 years down the road. They're looking at, I want to be a police officer today. I'll work everything you want, chief. I'll be there every weekend, every night, every holiday. And this is my life's dream until it becomes a Christmas Eve or a snowstorm, or I have a wedding to go to. And they say, well, wait, I should have a day off. And so it's an adjustment for any officer coming in, but we want to support them to understand that this is a commitment, that they're giving us the commitment, but we're giving it back to them as well. We want you to stay here. We don't want you to fly out the door. And I think that's a new concept for many students coming out of college. They don't see it as, well, what do you mean I'm going to be here in 20 years? And you would like them to stay, for sure. But if they don't want to, we want to help them get to where they need to be as well. My next life, I'll go back to Wayland and work for Chief Burman.
The other thing.
I think we all want to go work for Chief Burman.
Well, the other thing too is, I encourage a lot of trainings too. Like right now, I have all of my supervisors are going to FBI leader training. And I told them, I want you to all have your trilogy. And I'm sending them to those leadership courses. And what's really funny was I just had a meeting with all of my sergeants, and I pushed it again. I'm like, because some of them are doing it, others are kind of like, well, I'll go to it whenever. I'm like, no, I really want you to all have your trilogy and go for your leadership classes. And one of them said to me, why are we doing this? I said, because I'm building my succession plan. I plan on leaving, and I hope some of you are going to take what someone is going from within this department is going to take my spot.
That's a great way of looking at it. I think that's what's happened not only in police departments across this state and across the nation, but also in municipalities, is there's a lack of succession planning, and we're seeing gaping holes in governance. And in smaller communities, they're having a really hard time backfilling positions. So I love that you just brought that up, Chief Burman.
A lot of there's been a big shift, though, far as the retainment aspect in policing. I can tell you that policing 33 and a half years ago, 34 years ago, was totally different from what it is today, far as the recruitment and retainment. Back in the day, this was a professional career for people that really wanted to do the job and help the community. And not to say that they don't do it now, but with the the current atmosphere in policing, and the kind of the officers that are doing their job that are going to be held liable and responsible, and a lot of them are looking at it as like, well, do I want to do this for 20 years? And some of the new generation police officers, what you're finding, and what I found in the last several years of my employment, it was that a lot of them weren't staying because there were better jobs out there. They didn't like the media coverage on what officers are doing. And, officers on a daily basis, and this gets back to your point, Patty, on the education piece and having trained professional police officers that are educated, is that they are professionals and they do the right job, but we're held to a higher standard. And we're being critically looked at from what we do. And a lot of these officers are making judgment calls, and they're doing what they're trained to do, but they're still being held to this higher standard and being liable for what they're doing. And a lot of the newer generations don't want that liability. They don't want to be sued. They don't want to work weekends. They don't want to work holidays. They don't want, I could tell you in the first 20 years of my career, I worked Christmas all the time. There wasn't any vacation time for me. So, there is this shift now that part of the issues of retainment has to do with the new generation police officer and the ability to make it a profession. And that's a challenge going forward for many years.
Joe, I want to say something too. So when I came to Wayland, one of the first things I did with some pushback was I implemented body cams and dash cams here. So initially, some people were like, okay, yeah. And I did get some pushback. But I told them, I said, no, you see, you have no choice. We are doing this. And what was really interesting was the first night that we went live, the first night, it saved one of my guys' jobs. Accused of something by someone that he stopped. And it was amazing. I brought the complainant in, had them sit behind my desk with me, and we reviewed the video together. And from that day forward, I've had zero pushback. And that's happened on a few occasions here now. So they are full on board with it. It's funny, I had one of my cruisers, the dash cam was acting up a little bit. It was working, but acting up, but they all refused to drive it until we fixed it.
It's the added protection that, everything's being recorded.
Right.
And 99% of the times the officer is correct in what they're doing. So body cams are very advantageous. But a lot of municipalities, we had them where I was, but a lot of municipalities can't afford them, and a lot of them should be seeking grant money to get the body cams to help their officers. There is going to be that acclimation period that you mentioned, Chief, that officers are prone to resist, and why you're going to record this and record that, but it's all for their protection.
Mm-hmm. And training. You might find something that was unintentional and it's a gap in their training or something they thought they were doing correctly. So it goes back to the standards and retraining an officer, that it's not that it was a mistake and an error. It wasn't an intentional act. So we can take that footage and say, this is what we need to fix and correct and get into our standards and get into our policies.
I think it's that transition of mindset. You're looking at it as, how's this going to impact me, when you should be looking at it more towards how is it going to impact my career and what I'm doing more positively than in a negative annotation.
How is this going to help me, not hurt me?
Exactly. And Joe, you brought up a good point too, is that I remember back when I was growing up, and I'm a police officer's child. It was an honor to go and work in public service. And nowadays it's so challenging. It is so challenging. And we're asking men and women, not only every day when they get up in the morning, to put their lives on the line, but put their lives on the line for less than, what some other people are making in the private industry. And the benefits are a challenge. And I think you also brought up another good point, Joe, about the grant funding opportunities. And we're not seeing as many departments go after a lot of these grant funding opportunities that we kind of put out there, because they just don't have the staff or the skill set to write grants. So that's something that departments should be thinking about going down the road, whether they need assistance with, policies and procedures, whether they need assistance with the body cams, or even with, accreditation and standards. Can you, Joe, you have a background in grants. Sorry, Liz, I'm kind of stepping on your toes.
Yeah.
Jumping into my little brain trust. Can you talk about some of those grant funding opportunities that are out there for some of the departments?
There's this, again, we'll get back onto body cameras. There's the Burn grant where police departments can get some grant funding for equipment to help officers. There's grant funding for policy development. I know we mentioned earlier about agencies hiring third parties or utilizing third party companies to assist them. There is some grant funding available for them. The state website for grants is available for communities to look at. There is federal grants also that are available that they can pursue. But there is a lot of grants. A lot of them are, matching funds or a certain percentage of fundings that a community has to participate in. But the majority of them are three-quarters of them can be paid for by either a state or a federal agencies. It's similar to that as a bulletproof vest program, which communities will utilize some grant funding to upgrade their body armor for their officers to protect them. And there is federal and state funding for that. So communities should be reaching out and again obtaining those opportunities. And again, our company's here to assist them in that if they so choose, or they can look at it themselves and try to tackle that. But as Chief Burman indicated earlier, a lot of communities that are small just don't have the manpower or the time or effort to look for it and apply for it, because it is a cumbersome process to develop a grant and apply for the grant. And then there's the aspect of a reporting aspect once you do get the grant that agencies have to comply with. So there is a process involved, and communities really should be looking forward and looking at the opportunity to obtain those.
And Joe, I think it's good to know some communities that they hear, oh, it's body cameras. How expensive can it really be? It's a camera. But they don't understand the full process of officers aren't fighting the cameras. It's who's maintaining those cameras and the expense of the storage of the data and who's tracking on that, and then the records request on it. That becomes cost prohibitive to some small departments to say we can't afford to have someone maintain all these recordings for us.
Right. And getting back to the body cameras, there are there are several different types of programs available that agencies use. Some do require additional fundings for the storage of data. There is some other companies that include that within their software, as far as redaction process. And the records aspect is a whole different piece in itself. That is a very time-consuming process, especially if public records requests come involved and district attorney's offices get involved and everything. But there are workarounds within the software of body cameras. So when an agency is actually looking for the grant, they got to consider all those different topics. And the one thing that when I went through the process several years ago, I reached out to several different communities, not only local and mass, but throughout the country, to see what the common body cameras uses were and the expense aspect of it. And I can tell you that it could get expensive, but the grant funding is there to assist you with the initial cost, startups and equipment and so forth. So.
Yeah. Body cameras aren't they required mostly in all departments nowadays? Or aren't they required? I thought they were required.
Requirement. There is a lean towards everyone going towards body cameras because of what Chief Burman had indicated earlier, is that it protects the officer. A majority of the times, the officers are doing the correct thing. Yep. And to have that documented in a video is, you can't deny video. Once you see it, it's there. Okay. Versus I did this, I did that, as far as a verbal, people question verbal testimony of officers. I mean, they do it every day in the court.
Yep.
So once you see a video, you can't change the video. The video is the video. And that's where it becomes very advantageous to have body-worn cameras.
Yeah.
Now, we're getting really off topic.
No, yeah, I'm gonna transition back and this is gonna be for Rick, but I guess I was thinking about how all the programs and trainings that police officers go through in the steps of like becoming accredited and a department becoming accredited. How does the process work? I was trying to think about like having these grants awarded to departments help with being seen as reputable and help with the accreditation process.
So I think the important thing, excuse me, little frog in my throat.
Huh.
1 second. Well, I'm back now.
Did everyone bring their coffees?
Oh yes, I'm on my
third cup.
Yeah, I'm on my third too. Joe, totally just one of those mornings. So thank you for understanding. The accreditation process in itself, I think it's important to kind of understand how it's structured. Let me just give you a quick background on Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission. And, we have, for a state program, we're one of 36 states that have a state law enforcement credentialing body. We're part of an organization called AccrediNet, where all those states meet regularly. As a matter of fact, I have a meeting this afternoon at 3 p.m. And that's a great way for us to update our resources on nationwide best practices. But our program is very large in terms of the number of participants. We have 256 police departments, and we have 394 standards. The standards are broken down into a couple of different tiers for awards. So our first tier is certification. That involves 178 standards. They're all mandatory. You have to comply with all of them. And then our second tier accreditation involves those 178 plus another 96 mandatory standards. And then we have some optional standards when you get to that second tier, 120. And they're broken down based on agency size. So, you can have, you generally won't hit all 394 because the optionals have a percentage of compliance. But the point being is the accreditation process, the very first thing an agency has to do is be able to commit an accreditation manager to the role. And I think that's what Ed and Patty will talk about, and even Joe, is having a body that's assigned to at least a portion of their work week to manage the accreditation process, to build files, can be a bear. One of the things we have failed in the past at MPAC is we really put a lot of information forward saying the accreditation manager, and we focus on the accreditation manager, and it becomes an obstacle for a smaller department versus the mindset that if Ed is the accreditation manager in his department, he should be handling putting things in the files, making sure reports are turned in, coordinating with the chief, going through what needs to go through. And I use this example before he's the CEO, obviously, it's hypothetical. And then each function within the department should have some ownership in the role. So property and evidence, Chapter 84 in our program and Chapter 83, should be handled by the property evidence custodian, that's part of their primary job. Detectives, whoever has the detective function, even in a smaller, should handle Chapter 2 investigations. So the way the path forward is that everybody has some involvement based on their mission size function within the agency and the topical standard for whatever we're doing. That's sort of the failure. Because I think many departments think I have to have an accreditation manager. They have to do this full time. And the reality is there's many hats: training, recruitment, retention, backgrounds. It literally have to be a jack of all trades as the accreditation manager. So the process is, and when you get in the door, is how do I look at this? What are the critical elements? We have a function early on where we're focused on police reform related standards based on the acts of 2020, Chapter 253 legislation that changed that. So to combat that it has to be an agency-wide approach. You have to make sure the people that do the jobs are assigned those chapters and standards that are related to their jobs, and that the accreditation manager functions with the authority of the CEO to get the job done.
You had mentioned like a few hundred different types of standards. Can you kind of explain the ones that are more difficult to obtain for departments?
So it's funny, I get that question a lot. Like, what are the hardest standards? The reality is there's no set. I think this, if I will use that, the one more challenging is establishing the training side of it. And we've talked about training and how essential it is. Because you have to establish the schedule, ensure you have it meets our requirements, ensure you have a lesson plan in place, that your instructor is certified, that all the people that are supposed to do it, and then the tail end often that's missing, it's documented. The attendees are documented, the lesson plans and learning objectives are documented. So I find sometimes the training standards are a little more difficult for departments to digest, because it's not just doing the training, it's proving that you do the training. And that's the principle of accreditation. What are you doing and how are you proving it? I do think sometimes when you're talking about, if you go into a body-worn camera, you have to look at all of the things that Patty talked about, and Ed, and even not just the equipment, but how do you manage it? Who manages public release of the data? How long is it stored for? Where is it stored? Is it stored on site, or is it a cloud-based system through the vendor? So really, I think it really comes down to each standard has multi-facets of it. So none is harder than the other. It's just covering every single standard. Sometimes it's simple as going back and reading it. Ed as an assessor may have a really good knowledge, but he hasn't touched or looked at the standard in a while. So it's the run home to mama is to go back to the standards manual. We're in a really unique position. Prior to last year, we used a checklist-based system, and we used a hard copy-based system. We're the last program in the nation to be using pencil and paper. That checklist involved 2,000 questions, and it was very cumbersome at times. We've now taken all of that data and transferred it into an electronic standards manual with functions like glossary and links to different terms and laws, which helps an agency, particularly those people that aren't experts in accreditation, understand exactly what we're asking for. And that's the critical element.
Chief, do you feel, did you use or did your accreditation manager use the electronic system, or was it a checklist, pen and paper?
So we're still in the process. We're kind of using two systems, but we are definitely electronic. But we are in the process of, we basically started from scratch. So we are looking at each policy, and we're actually in the process right now of, we're actually trying to push out 4 to 5 updated policies a week in our department through our electronic system.
That's a lot. Wow. Takes a long time. I feel like if you don't have a person dedicated to accreditation or handling all the documents and taking down, every step what we're doing, it must take a while for a department to become accredited.
So the nationwide, the average for programs is 3 to 4 years from the time you commit to beginning your review of your written directive system to having an initial award or an onsite for an initial award. So it is a multi-year process. And I think sometimes communities can get frustrated because it does involve a cost. There are some membership dues. You have to invest in people that are going to be working on the written directives internally, having the training schedule and the associated costs. But it is important. It's not an overnight process. And on average, it's 3 to 4 years. And, MPAC is looking at how we establish deadlines that are reasonable for departments along those lines. But yeah, that multi-year process is an important thing to know about the accreditation process as a whole. It doesn't happen overnight, and you really have to take the time to get it right.
Patty, you worked for Framingham Police, right?
Yes,
So was Framingham also accredited?
we were accredited for years under, I think, 3 different chiefs. But when you go back in for your reviews, it's still, once again, going back and updating and checking in our policies. It's the proof of compliance, as Rick had mentioned. We might do everything right all the time, but show your training record, show the last time this was updated, show the last time the building was checked or your generator was checked. And there's a lot of extras. It's not just the training and the officers, it's your building, it's your supplies, it's your holding facilities, it's care of prisoners when they come in and arrestees, medical treatment, food. It's so much more than just officers in training. And that's why it takes the whole department to be invested in this and to understand it's not just about, the MPAC seal on your car or to say that we're accredited. It's so much more because it's everyone's involved and has a piece of that.
Just add on what Patty was just saying. I mean, the process in itself, I can tell you when Rick just mentioned that we went from a paper process to a electronic format. So he mentioned over 2,000 questions that, had to be answered in over 540 pages of documents. That was the process. So when you're looking at accreditation, it's a comprehensive, fluid, ongoing process. And it's just not something you do, for a couple of months and let it be. It's something, it's evolving on a daily basis. And it's the documentation piece that Patty just indicated.
It's huge.
Is that you have to document and document and document. And it goes back to this, okay? I mean, communities expect police departments to be run professionally. So to be professional, we have to adhere to accountability of what we do in our process. And once we obtain our accountability, we're very transparent to the community. And what that does is that once accountability is in place and there's transparency that the community knows that the police department is doing the job, that pot of trust comes into play. So being accredited is I take it as an honor and a privilege, to be honest with you, because you're documenting your process, you're being accountable for what you're doing, and you're being transparent by telling the community what you are doing. So, again, it's a very, very fluid concept, and it's very, very time consuming, but there is a benefit to it.
Can I just dovetail that a little bit on the transparency and accountability element? My phone rings every day. And it rings as most people, just like the chief and Patty and Joe when he was in the captain, people aren't calling to say what a great job you did. It's just the inherent nature of the phone calls we get. Usually it's a level of dissatisfaction, it's a complaint, it's a frustration. Sometimes it can be very far out in left field. More often than not, there's something that's accurate within the conversation. I've received phone calls in the last year from as far away as a reporter from the Washington Post. Everything we do here in Massachusetts, depending on the scope and nature, becomes national, just like everything that happens across the country has an impact here. And those phone calls start out with a lot of frustration and a lot of misunderstanding about what accreditation is. The transparency element, I think, is critical for departments now. Having your written directive system available to the public has been really, a lot of departments have pushed back on it, but once they do it and they post their policies, there are some restrictions. You're not going to want to post your undercover operations and narcotics investigation policy for the public. It becomes an officer safety. It becomes an issue for the integrity of an investigation. Your special weapons and tactics or special weapons and tactics team policies. There are some restrictions about tactics that you wouldn't post for obvious reasons. But for the most part, when an agency posts their general written directive system or policies, that transparency element is picked up by citizens, and it's tough for them to argue whether something was done right when they can see what the process is in writing. So that's the transparency element I've seen help. Accountability, when I get these phone calls complaining, like, how is this department accredited? They had this happen. The accreditation process is for the agency. It's for the Wayland Police Department. And Chief Burman may have an officer that does something outside the scope of what they're supposed to. I look at that as long as Chief Burman does an investigation, he documents the investigation. When warranted, he holds an individual accountable. He's met the requirements of accreditation. There's a misconception that because someone is accredited, bad things can't happen and people can't do stupid things. They still will, unfortunately, because there's a human element to every job. But when Chief Burman, using him in this hypothetical example, has a policy on internal affairs, that it has to begin a process, that it has to be documented, it has to be submitted to Peace Officers Training and Training Commission. It's meeting that accountability element. It takes away the question about, well, they're not going to do anything. So the chief can say, no, we did this. It went to the district attorney's office as warranted. So accreditation doesn't stop things from happening on the individual officer basis. That's why we accredit the entire agency. And I think that answers the question of accountability. What does the agency do when something goes less than ideal? And with accreditation, you can't ignore it. And if you do ignore it, you're in jeopardy with the post, with the MPAC, with your community. So it really helps boost that accountability level sometimes too. And I think that's an important thing to know.
Thanks, Rick. I do have a question for all of the panelists, given what the points that you've all hit. What advice would you give to law enforcement agencies starting the accreditation process, especially in terms of overcoming obstacles and aligning them with the goals of being transparent and accountable? Anyone?
I'll say real quick, Eddie's really good at his own process, but I think first, it's baby steps. As Rick had said, it's a process and takes time. So don't be overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, there's too many standards. How do we get started? Where do we begin? So just understand it's going to take time, and you already have a baseline. You have policies already. So just be ready to go back in and look and to make sure that you can show that you're doing what you have in written format a process and make sure you're doing that.
And what we did here as we got started was we went through what we did was I sat down with my accreditation manager and we looked at all of our policies. And what we did was we identified the policies that needed to be addressed first. For example, use of force, those type of policies, things that would come up more frequently possibly than something else, right? So we kind of prioritized how we were looking at our list of policies to review and put them in order.
I think from MPAC's perspective, it's let the community know what's going on. Let them know you've committed and signed an application and contract. Let them know you're beginning the process. Update them throughout the multi-year process. Agencies that have citizens police academies, involve an accreditation element to explain what it is. If there's written directives related to specific functions in the community where you can get feedback from the community, maybe you have a community engagement program that you're proud of that involves community members, have them participate in the discussion. The more you advise the community of what's happening over the multi-year process, the more they stay engaged, because it takes away from that misconception that Chief Burman's doing accreditation and why hasn't it happened yet? You feed the beast, you feed the media release, social media, and those victories also help the department feel like they're making progress too. Because when you have a multi-year process, it can be frustrating for a community like, why aren't we there yet? So I think some of the things from our perspective we've seen with success stories are departments that announce when they're joining the program, and departments when they hit milestones. Departments, we have a notification process required before an assessment that you advise the community you're having an on-site assessment beginning. Those are critical, I think, for the success of the department to have the support of the community. Here's the reality, and I talked about those phone calls with disgruntled and dissatisfied citizens, in some cases from across the country, because of what they're perceiving and what they're seeing. In every conversation, I can get generally them to admit, you're not going to go have significant surgery at a healthcare facility that's not accredited. You're not going to send your son or daughter to a higher ed institution that's not accredited. Law enforcement accreditation established that same level of confidence, the same level of outside of review, and meeting standards of best practices industry-wide. And when you talk about it from that perspective, I think for some citizens, some members of the community, the light bulb goes off. If I wouldn't go to a college that's not accredited, or I wouldn't have significant surgery at a hospital that's not accredited, why wouldn't I want my police department to be accredited too? So that's an important element there.
The one thing I want to mention here is that when we, if an agency's starting the process of accreditation, there are key things that we had mentioned during our discussion today, is that the review of what your actual practice is, or whether or not the practice is actually documented. That is one of the key things. A lot of agencies do the correct thing, but it's not documented anywhere. So that's the beginning process. And those policies you do have is that you have to review them and make sure they're up to date. I can tell you some agencies that, it's not a just once and done review. It's a process that's ongoing and should be reviewed on an annual basis to make sure that it is the best police practices. And, a lot of agencies, they try to manipulate their policies to what they do, and create something. They should be looking at other agencies, what they do in their process, to see if, their process is actually the better way of doing things. And by reaching out and networking with other police agencies, not only in Mass, but throughout the country, you're able to find a better process that works. And once that starts, and then you can begin the process of doing the documentation, doing the training, and to have a specific person that's able to handle the process. We always say you have to have a round peg and a round hole. You don't want to put someone that doesn't want to do the job in that position as an accreditation manager to document everything. So there is a specific person within your agency that it's important for a chief to reach out and say, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And that's a critical element, because that person can actually make the system go a lot smoother than what it is.
I can say from Joe's perspective, Patty, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're looking for the person probably not diagnosed, but you know they have OCD. Are they organized? Are they detail oriented? If you have those skills, you can learn accreditation. Because when you're talking about nearly 400 standards and the associated files and how you're proving evidence and compliance, I never wanted to be accreditation manager 20 years ago plus when the chief put me in the position in Warwick. It was probably the best move that could have happened. He saw that I had that OCD level. Like I said, not quite diagnosed, but I think that's a great point. Many chiefs and some, therefore, like, where are we going to put this person? Well, we'll put him in accreditation. We don't have any place else for him. I will caution departments about doing that. It really sets you up for failure, especially now because with police reform and all of that elements of our program and with so many standards, you can't just throw anybody in the mix and expect to have success. So I just wanted to harp on that from that perspective. I'm sorry, Patty, to interrupt.
No, I was going the same. And years ago as an assessor, I got into an agency and we go in to review all their folders and files. And their accreditation manager was so locked in, and it was his baby, this project. But by day 2 in the afternoon of, okay, show me the compliance, you knew they had it. Just that one form hadn't been put into the folder. And he was at wit's end at that point. We do it. I said, I know you do it. I just need this little form that says, show it to me for this year. And it becomes so personal for them. And that's the person that you want. The person that becomes so invested and understands each folder and what's needed to represent the department properly.
Mm-hmm. You also want to have an EAP program in the department. So they're going to need employee assistance. That's the reality of it.
Yes,
so we'll leave it at that.
They will.
I just wanted to ask, does anyone in the audience have any questions? If so, we'll take them. We'll give them a quick 10 seconds. Anyone? No? Okay. Does anyone else on the panel have anything they'd like to add to our discussion? All right. So we're going to wrap it up here. I just want to say thank you all for joining us today for Sipping on Standards, Policing the Path to Accreditation. It's been a really great conversation and discussion. It's been a privilege to have such an engaged panel and to hear from each and every one of you. Rick Rathbun, Ed Burman, Patty Grigas, Joe Compercio, and Nicole Figueredo, who share their expertise and thoughtful perspectives on the critical role of accreditation in modern law enforcement. We hope today's discussion provided valuable insights into how accreditation promotes transparency, accountability, and stronger community relationships while addressing the challenges facing law enforcement agencies today. If you have any additional questions or would like to learn more about the topics that we discussed today, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can also stay connected with us for updates on future Coffee Talk webinars and other initiatives designed to bring together thought leaders and explore key issues in municipal governance and public service. Once again, thank you all for your time and participation. Together, we're fostering conversations that lead to meaningful change in stronger communities. Have a great day.
To everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.